welcome to the Hunt Backcountry Podcast. This is episode number 500. Pretty wild number. It's not actually episode 500 though, and we'll talk about that when we get into today's conversation with Steve. And today's conversation is our Gear of the Year podcast. Once again, we give more context to this here shortly as Steve and I get rolling, but this is something we've been doing for years and that you guys really seem to enjoy. If you want to see the full list of everything we discuss in this podcast and have links to each of those items, as well as links to all prior lists that are our Gear of the Year, going back all the way to 2018, check out the link in the show description and you can get all that. Before Steve and I get rolling, just want to say thank you to you guys for your continued support of the podcast. If you have been enjoying it, it does help us tremendously if you can leave a rating or review in your podcast app, or even just share it directly with a friend. We don't have any advertisers or sponsors or anything like that, so this show continues to happen because of your direct support. So thank you for doing that. And of course, if you guys have any questions or anything like that, we'd love to hear those and consider answering those on a future Q&A episode. You can always reach out to us directly, whether it's with a question or even just a guest suggestion, a topic suggestion, anything like that. Let us know what you want to hear and send an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com. And then one final reminder before we get into today's conversation. We rarely run sales through Exo Mountain Gear or rarely talk about Exo business stuff on the podcast. But this coming Monday, November 25th, if you are hearing this podcast as it is released, we are kicking off our once a year sale through Exo Mountain Gear. So this is going to offer really the only savings and the best pricing we've had on K4 pack systems. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss that, sign up and receive our emails. We're not going to send you a bunch of spam or junk or share information. We will remind you about this upcoming sale and then also just send other updates, including as we release videos from all of our experience project hunts this fall and more. So just go to exomountaingear.com/newsletter, sign up for that. Again, there'll be a link for that in the show description. Hit pause and do that now if you're interested. And then come on back. Let's get right into this conversation with Steve and I discussing our Gear of the Year. All right, Steve, we find ourselves again with the Gear of the Year. Been doing this since 2018, which is kind of cool to be able to go back and look at all those lists. And again, we'll leave links in the show description to all those, but been doing this a while. And then also just wanted to mention, as people have seen in the episode title, heard in the intro, this is episode 500, kind of. We have way more episodes than 500 out there. We have all the Monday Minutes and back when we had the COVID daily episodes, and there's definitely a
Oh
lot more
yeah,
than 500, but in terms of main shows and the way we name things, this is episode 500, which is cool.
very cool. Yeah, it's quite the, I'll say milestone. How long have we been doing it now? 2016 is when we started?
I
Is this
think it was
15?
15,
15?
2015.
Okay. 9 years. Crazy. Old balls, man.
Oh, balls. Uh, well, yeah, again, I want to recap to like why we're doing this. So as we've said, we've been doing this since 2018. You can go see all those lists, but let's kind of first start with why before we get into what. Um,
Why gear of the year?
yeah, like why do we
Okay,
do this every year?
you tell me.
Yeah, I don't remember why we started it. I'll put it that
Oh,
way. So we did it in
oh.
2018, but I know like for me now, the goal of doing this every year isn't to say, hey, here's something new that was released this year or what have you. Because in my head, when I look at making this Gear of the Year list, it's not what is a new product this year. Like if that's the case, that's great. But it's what stood out to me on hunts this year, right? So
Mhm.
a year like this year, multiple trips to Alaska, even other adventures, like I was considering the Death Hike, things like that. It's just looking back at all the hunts, all the training, all the hikes, all the adventures, all the everything, and just going, hey, what really mattered to me or what stood out this year? And then obviously, I just think it's worth noting if people have known us or follow the podcast, like all of this is also completely independent, meaning no sponsors, none of this is incentivized. There's nothing like that. This is truly just what stood out to me as a very valuable kind of maybe difference maker or something very helpful from all my hunts this year. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I think, it almost ties back into why do we do the podcast? It's just to obviously the goal has always been to provide valuable information as unbiased as possible. There's absolutely no sponsors. It's just you and I's real experiences, and we are obviously very fortunate to have access to a lot of different things, different gear items, different companies, to be able to test out a lot of stuff. Um, and so gear of the year is fun for me. Just it's truly my head always, when you sent the email a couple weeks ago, my head always immediately goes to, okay, what's new this year that I used? And that's certainly getting, I don't know if it's just gear is so dialed in, or I have stuff that I trust so much that there's not a whole, like at first glance, there's not a whole lot of changes. I really got to go through every item on the gear list and go, oh, okay, yeah, that is new, or I've been using those for 5 years now and that for 10 years. And there's a lot of things that have stayed the same.
Hmm.
Um, this is like on topic, off topic. I had a guy message me on Instagram, and he he basically said, "Hey, this is so and so from X podcast. I'm sponsored by this boot company, but I've never used any of their boots. Do you have any recommendations?"
Seriously?
Yeah, I was like, I didn't reply, man. I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. I was like, "You're sponsored by a boot company, but you've never used them. Like, so you just, it's just kind of so much of how a lot of this market works, and social media and sponsoring and stuff like that. So just everybody, everything you hear, even say it, tell it from us, man. Take it with a giant grain of salt because so much crap out there is just people getting paid to tell you they love it and like it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, sorry. I was, as you were talking about this, that popped in my mind. The
Yeah.
message came through the other week. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, for me, so much of it is just recapping like there's an overall theme of just how good the gear is, and it's really, is something really moving the needle a lot? No, not really. I mean, that's also the whole giant premise of the experience project here is we went into deep dives on all this stuff and what matters, what doesn't. Yeah, I'm
Yeah, I
rambling.
think, yeah, it was in one of the experience project podcasts or videos or both, but we talked about how rarely does one thing matter, meaning like one gear item isn't going to radically change everything. But when you have the cumulative collection of quality gear or gear that's just effective for you, and now you don't have any true weaknesses, even in terms of gear, you just become more effective, more capable. And that, again, I'm not saying like effective and capable from a skills perspective, but just from the ability to stay out there or to go farther or to continue pushing on in difficult conditions, that type of thing. So, on one hand, any one thing doesn't matter. And then on the other hand, the collection of everything can begin to matter based on how far you're pushing on your hunts. Before we dive into um, anything that's maybe new or necessarily the standouts from the gear of the year list, and again, we'll have all of this as we mention things for you guys listening to this, we're gonna have a list of everything. Um, so don't feel like you have to like remember this or write it all down or hear what we're saying. Just check out the one link for this year's gear list. We'll include all this. But before we get into new stuff, I always like looking back at all those previous gear lists and then seeing what are we still using, what are we loving, and what are things that we've said, whether that was 1 year or 5+ years ago, like, hey, I love this that we're still using. So for you, Steve, what are some of the things that were or are just kind of continue to be highlights for you?
Yeah, going back to just there's so many things that are I've been packing for I guess 5 to 10 years seems like ancient because of how fast gear is changing and new companies are popping up and there's new products every freaking day. But one thing that stood out to mind is just the newish way of filtering water. So running the um, Kaded NB free on the Hydropack Seeker 3 liter bladder. I mean, that system is just so freaking dialed. It weighs nothing. You get to pack an extra 3 liters of water around with you. So that stood out to me as one. Running Onyx on your phone, I truly don't imagine, can't remember hunting without that. Like how different that was. I mean,
Hmm.
it's a tool that we are even in familiar country or brand new country. All the Alaska hunts this year, it's so critical to download the high resolution imagery, and you can really pick your way. You can find routes through brush. I mean, we did a lot of navigating this year, covering through country that you've never been in before, and Alaska's so dang brushy that you can quickly, like on the moose hunt, you pretty quickly figured out like, okay, if it's brown, it's actually not good. It's either that really, because the pictures were taken, I think probably late in the year when everything's all browned up, but the green stuff was actually like the lower kind of mossy grass stuff that was just growing off like, a few inches off the ground. So you kind of apply what you're seeing on the map on the aerial imagery to what you're actually seeing there in the field and helps you, navigate around. It's absolutely critical.
Hmm.
Uh, Digiscoping, just I'm not even like a specific product here, but just the act of having these phones with really good cameras in them and then being able to zoom in on an animal and film it and get photos of it. As I was like coming up with this list, I was scrolling through my phone and then just all every time especially on the moose hunt when we're trying to identify if it's 50 inches wide, you're taking pictures of it and then able to, get the camera off the spine scope and zoom in and really analyze it. I mean, that truly is a huge feature to have. My EL range TAs from Swarovski that I'm using for my binoculars and rangefinder, they're not perfect, but man, they do it. They're really, really, really good. If the ranging in them was just as, even 50% closer to what the SIG has as far as their kind of consistency and speed, then they'd be unbelievable. But those things are just they will work, man. I find an animal, I range it, it gives me an MOA, I dial, I shoot, the animal dies. It's pretty freaking incredible. The next one I had was my gun setup. That really hasn't changed for a handful of years, with the exception of changing from a 6.5 Creedmoor to the 6 Creedmoor. But the setup of my Night Force scope, that MDT Hunt 26 chassis, running the 5-inch Thunderbeast suppressor on there. Oh, it's just freaking incredible. It's such a fun gun to shoot and just really functional, practical out there in the field. It's bomb proof. I drop it. The scope holds at zero. Having the chassis that folds and then also the Arca rail built into it to shoot off of a tripod, which we'll get into later as a gear of the year thing. Just freaking awesome. Sun hoodies. That's the last 4 or 5 years just started wearing sun hoodies. I don't really have like this year. I got some ones from a company called Anetik, Anetik. Like literally, I was in Hawaii a few years ago and bought one at oh, you were with me when we
Yeah.
went with the families, and I bought one at this coffee shop and ended up just like Googling the brand and found, it's like got like two sun hoodies for $45, and I wore those all of the hunts, and they're just freaking awesome. I just lightweight, they dry quick, they breathe well. Yeah, use the hood for keeping the sun off of you, the bugs out of your ears, things like that. That really was used that a lot on the caribou hunt when we had all the freaking biting flies. Super Feet insoles, that Adapt Hike Max or Hike Max cushion that they renamed it to. The all the boot testing that I've done that I did this year, I can drop those in. They improve basically every single thing that I put my feet into. It's like never is it worse. They're just consistently freaking awesome. And they've been holding up really well too, because I've got 3 or 4 pairs now, and I don't know which. Like I know I bought a new pair this year for the Death Hike just to have a nice fresh pair for that max cushioning. And then it's like I can't tell which is which. So that it's a good sign in that like durability from the pair that's 4 years old that has who knows how many miles on it. I can't tell the difference between them. So that's pretty impressive. Crocs, especially with all the Alaska hunts, the 4-wheel drive of Alaska. Those things are incredible. Something that I definitely become a regular staple packing in my gear, even obviously being ultralight and minimalist as possible. Those things really enable you to cover country in a different way, way, way beyond just being camp shoes.
Yeah.
And then the last one I had was just my sleep system and the options around that. Running, I run that Thermarest pad and the Katabatic quilt. And then I did get a new bivy sack this year from Hyperlight Mountain Gear that's Cuban fiber and really, really liked that. So it's got a full bathtub floor to it, which came in handy on the caribou hunt where we had the river flowing through our tent, and I actually kept everything dry. So that was pretty fantastic. And then just running, both we ran 2 different Hildeberg tents. That's where through SNS Archery, obviously, I literally grabbed like I want to try this tent out and take it on the hunt, and then we can sell it as used afterwards. So I don't live in the real world there, but having just we ran the shell an Anahan 2 shell only on the caribou hunt, and that worked fantastic. And then ran a different one, which I actually didn't like as much on the moose hunt. Can't remember the name of it. It's a 2-person, 2-door Rogan, I think is what it
Oh
was.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It didn't do
It's
very
the
well in the
Rogan.
wind until you had to guy line out the doors. But the
Yeah.
first couple of nights, it was like, oh, it should be fine. And it wasn't that windy, and it's okay. Yeah. So that's it. But there's just so much I could just go through my list, and it's like so much of this stuff is either gear I said that's been in there for 5, 10 years, or I am running a newer version, but just at any like you could give me the version that was 5 years ago because the difference is 5%, 10% better with the new one. Like
Hmm.
water filters would be a good example. Like I don't, the, there's just so many things that are dialed in.
Hearing that so much of is obviously similar. I do and use a lot of the same things, but it is interesting to think of the time factor of that because it's easy to think of 3 or 4 year, 5 years ago. On one hand is very recently, but on the other hand, when you've used something for so many years, you feel like you've been using it that way forever.
Hmm.
And then, like you said, even with Onyx, for example, you kind of forget what it was like before that. Um, and that applies to Onyx, but also to, as you said, like it applies to water filters, it applies to digiscoping, all these things that are so standard and that we use so much and in some ways rely on so heavily. It's like, yeah, definitely 10 years ago, things looked very different. And in all
Hmm.
reality, like a lot's changed in 10 years, but 10 years isn't that long ago. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And us being in the hunting industry day to day, like 10 years seems like an eternity.
for
But
sure.
if you're, you know, 10 years ago you were 40 and now you're 50, you're like, not much has changed. I don't know. This depends on your perspective.
Well, yeah, some of the stuff for me that stood out, kind of specific items from previous Gear of the Year lists. Again, I could say the same to much of what you said, but uh, people have heard me say it a million times. My Katabatic quilt, I absolutely still love that thing. I first included it on the Gear of the Year list in 2018 and I had been using it prior. Those Hanwag Alverstone boots, I first included on a Gear of the Year list in 2021. Still use those very extensively. Those Exoskin boxers, I included a couple of years ago, still using those really exclusively for any hunts. And then even basic stuff like you and I, Steve, have both mentioned multiple times, darn tough socks. And I mean, that even like applies outside of hunting. I've over the years just almost thrown away other cheaper, crappier socks and kind of invest in darn tough socks, whether it's for, just running, biking, hiking, hunting, almost everything I'm using them for. So, um, yeah, there's just certain. I mean, I wanted to call out some of these things again, just because I think at the end of the day, when you have items that work and have longevity and that you stick with year after year, especially for you and I, Steve, when we have a lot of opportunity to do other things, to try other things, to use other things, but yet we still have certain items that we just stick with year after year. It's just a good sign, at least for us, that those are really great items. And I just want to be really clear with letting folks know that, hey, at least for us, these are some of the things that we just absolutely love and stick with over the years.
Yeah. Except the Exoskin boxers. I finally bought a pair and did not like them.
Oh, what didn't you like about them?
Um, it's not that not that I didn't like them. I didn't like them as much as I like the Adidas ones that I've bought on Amazon and run. Yeah. They just seemed a little bit hotter, sweatier to me, I guess you could say.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
longer and a little bit thicker. But
Yeah.
all right, well, let's get into new stuff. Again, new with an asterisk. It's maybe not new items for this year, but just the stuff that stood out to us this year. So let's bounce back and forth a little bit, Steve. Um, yeah, no certain order. In years past, we've done certain things like picked price points of, hey, here's our gear of the year for an item that's $0 to $50 or, 100 to $300. We don't have any structure this year. We just sat down and said, hey, here's things that stood out from the year.
Mm.
So for you, Steve, yeah, what's the top of your list, man?
This will sound funny, but new to me was running a stock K4 pack. Uh, I, I never we for the experience project, I'm always prototyping stuff and playing with ideas and concepts and trying new fabrics and whatnot. And, so I rarely hunt with a stock pack, but for the project, it visually had to be stock, and that for photos and marketing materials and doing the videos and whatnot, that it needed to be the pack that we're selling, obviously. So it was the first time I'd actually hunted with a stock K4 pack. Because in 2023 it was pretty close, but we made some tweaks to the frame was the frame, but the bags, we made some tweaks. And I remember being on the caribou hunt thinking, oh yeah, like this is the first time I've hunted with this thing, which is kind of funny. But it was obviously this is self-serving, but man, I was really just blown away by, especially on that caribou hunt where it's like you're loaded up for like all the scenarios that we threw at it over
Hmm.
the course of that hunt. From I said you loaded up with 5 days of gear, you hike a couple thousand feet, busting brush, you get up there, we set up camp. The next day, within a few hours, we're killing an animal, we're throwing meat on the frame with all your gear and weapon. You're hiking a couple miles. We drop all the meat, all the gear, go super light packs, climb even higher to the top of the mountain, kill my bull, throw all the meat on it, hike back down to camp. The next morning, kill Jeff's bull. Like that, it was just like meat. I mean, like that hunt was just packing freaking meat the whole time. But the
Yeah.
ability to get meat on and off of it and how it handled all those different loads, and then getting down the meat down to the river and then traversing the river back to where our other stuff was stashed to throw on the rafts and pack the rafts back up. I mean, it was just felt like one different task after another for the pack versus just like, oh, I threw my backpacking gear in it. I hunted for a week. I didn't kill anything. I hiked out. Like this had a lot of scenarios. Throwing those freaking caribou racks on there that were, what was mine? 48 pounds or
Yeah,
something?
48.
Or Jeff's was the heaviest at 48, I think. And then mine was like 46 or something. Those things were massive. And
Then that was with all of my splitting all my meat too.
yeah, yeah. That was a heavy pack out. Um, anyway, the packs just did perform beyond my expectations. I was incredibly happy with them.
Hmm.
No issues, nothing breaks, nothing squeaks, nothing rubs. Just performed, just doing their job. I love it.
Yeah, it's definitely very confidence inspiring. And I've told you this offline, Steve, of I think I mean, that's like become our baseline, right? Because that's what we know, it's what we do, it's what we test. And I almost think we've become a little bit like we've almost forgot how much it can suck to have a really rough pack out.
Hmm.
Meaning not rough in the sense that as you said, we're doing pack outs and all that stuff, and they're heavy, but just like a truly kind of miserable one in the sense that you have a pack that's hurting you.
Yeah.
It's thankfully been a long time since that's been the case, which is great.
Yeah,
But I
yeah, it'd be
also think it's like, yeah,
fun to go back and grab a pack I used 15 years ago or something and be like, "Oh, Lord." But yeah, just genuinely, there was multiple times I remember looking back to you on the caribou hunt, like, dude, this thing just this thing kicks ass. Like, I guess I was just beyond thrilled with the performance, and cool thing is, just keeps getting better, man. Like, working on stuff for the future, and it's like, I mean, everything's steps. It's a ladder, right? So it's like you get to this point, and it's like, okay, here's the new baseline. How can I fine tweak and tune from here and continue to make it better? Yeah, I'm excited for the future.
well, the first one for me is not new, but it was just Tailwind. So for people that don't know what Tailwind is, it's a drink mix. It's a high carb kind of drink mix. And this, I'm only putting this first because it stood out to me because I was thinking earlier in the year, like what's one of the first things we did, and it was the death hike in the Grand Canyon. And I've been using Tailwind on and off for several years at this point. But the Grand Canyon hike, especially, I used it quite a bit. And just this idea of being able to get liquid calories in without having to eat a lot of food. And, there's so many different drink mixes on the market. And I'll often try stuff or we'll get samples of stuff. And, again, there's so many out there. But one thing I love about Tailwind is I personally don't get like super tired of it. It's not very sweet. So even though it's high carb, and really high sugar, it doesn't taste like you're drinking sugar, if that makes sense. So just from a fueling standpoint, I was just thinking of the death hike this year and how much I relied on Tailwind and enjoyed it. And I don't pack a lot of it on hunts, but I do think for certain hunts, when you know you're going to be covering a lot of ground and very active, having something like Tailwind and being able to consume calories as you're sipping on a drink versus eating, is just a really good strategy to consider. So if you guys have never messed with liquid calories, and you want to try something like that, maybe you're the guy who, on those early season hunts, it's a struggle to eat real food or to eat food consistently, or you get burned out on like super sugary snacks and drinks. If you haven't checked out Tailwind, I would maybe check it out. What's cool as well is they have different flavors. They also have what they have naked. It's like an unflavored Tailwind. They have some with and without caffeine. So yeah, it's just a cool product. Again, zero affiliation there. Pay full price for it, buy it. But yeah, it was definitely stood out to me again this year.
My next on the list, which you have this as an honorable mention, I think you're crazy. Alpaca rafts. Those obviously the two hunts don't exist that we did this year. My two,
Yeah.
Alaska caribou and moose, don't exist without those rafts. The caribou hunt, I guess you could do with a bigger, heavier raft, but then logistics change with flights getting in there because you're limited on weight capacity. So I mean, they just were incredible. We were Obviously we had the crazy flooding, which I was Justin's editing all the footage right now and going back and like pop in his office like 5 times a day, just like watch some of the clips. That's pretty fun to just look at and relive some of the memories just for my own, self. And yeah, just some of the clips bobbing down the river, what those things are able to do, they're incredible. Obviously, it's not everybody needs to go out and buy an alpaca raft because, well, you got to have a hunt that applies to. You got to have a river to float, and country around it to hunt. But for those two hunts in particular, they were absolutely essential. The moose one, to be able to take a 11, 12 pound raft and throw it on your back and hike into that country and then float that river out. Like, you're not doing that with a bigger, heavier raft. There's no option to land an airplane up higher in there. Like that hunt doesn't exist without those rafts, just flat out. So I just blown away. We were all like no issues with durability. If anything, I mean, we way exceeded we put an entire multiple moose, um, but one moose per raft and a ranger with antlers. You got 600 pounds of meat, 50, 60 pounds of antler, gear, and a guy. I mean, it's pretty freaking incredible. You would That was on a flat river that was barely moving. You wouldn't want to do that on like something with whitewater, but
Yeah.
it did it. I mean, it was unreal. So we did learn, we had all that silt on the first hunt, and then I cleaned them, I hosed them down, I wiped them down, but I didn't really like toothbrush clean them. And you definitely need to do that with the zippers and valves because we had a bunch of issues on the moose hunt getting things to hold air. And that's just that, in particular, that the Caribou River was so silty from that flooding that
Yeah.
everything was just covered in a really fine silty sand. And that's a learning experience I had to go through. And now I know a lot better. I cleaned the crap out of all those rafts after that moose hunt and got them really good to store away for the year. So yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah. Thor from Alpaca told us afterwards it was the first time he's seen anyone put a whole moose in a Ranger. And he's like, I'm glad to know it can float.
I got a
Uh,
funny picture of Bashma because he had this entire moose in the rack in there, and then they were bringing the rafts upstream so we could move camp, and then he's literally like on the back of it kicking, with his legs
uh-huh.
dangling in the water, and the raft is just barely freaking doing it. And yeah, it's pretty damn funny. Uh,
Yeah, I had mine in there as honorable mentions, not because it's not great or like marginal on the list, but just because it's less like relevant to everyone. But I will say
yeah,
it should be on your radar. I mean, I think the thing I can say about alpaca rafts is I enjoyed it so much, and as you said, for some of the hunts we did this year, they were a must. But on the flip side, it's such a great tool and just a fun, great experience that I'm quite literally looking for hunts to
yeah,
plan simply to use the Packraft, right? And I don't mean that just because it opens up new country, new opportunities. That's true. But also just because I want to do more Packraft hunts, like period. Um, yeah, such a yeah, they're very cool. I mean, I'm still when I look at pictures from the caribou hunt and see us on the water and all you see is the caribou racks on top, but you don't see everything in the tubes. And I know what went in them, but still it's just like mind blowing. Like we each had a full caribou plus our packs, plus our boots, plus extra gear, and all that is in the tubes and the way that those things handled that water. I mean, it's just crazy. So, yeah, definitely a must, to like continue to use those and look for ways to use them. Well, that I you have more than I do, so we'll stick with you because I'm echoing yours on alpaca raft. So you pick another one.
I think next is I just put small caliber rifles. And clearly, we did a lot of discussion with Forum this year on small caliber rifles. You just had the other, I think, a couple episodes I wasn't able to get on, um, but just kind of fine tuning, polishing that subject, talking about it in more depth. We went out. I mean, we killed two caribou and two moose with my rifle. Performance was absolutely fantastic. Uh, I I don't even know what to say. They're freaking awesome. Everybody should be shooting one. Like, in my opinion, um, yeah, every freaking big gun should just be thrown in the trash, and everybody should switch to small caliber rifles, simply because less animals are going to be wounded, and that's a lot of people are going to blah 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 blah. Obviously we've proven that they're more than capable of killing big, heavy-bodied, big-boned animals, and that's the future, frankly. Like
Hmm.
everybody I know that's in my circle is going that way if they're not already. And I think it's certainly you look right now and then you know go if we send a survey out to our email list, 80% of them are shooting something bigger than a 6.5 Creedmoor. Uh, Maybe that's a bigger number than the actual reality. But anyway, you do that survey again in 5 years, I think it's going to be a dramatic shift towards smaller calibers.
Hmm.
It should be. If it's not, I guess we didn't do our job well enough.
I've definitely gotten a lot of emails from guys through the podcast who were saying, "Hey, I was getting ready to buy a new rifle or to build a new rifle, and it was going to be a 7 PRC or it's going to be a 300 Win Mag or something to the effect." And after our conversations with Form, they're reconsidering everything and changing. So it's definitely happening. And again, I think it's worth stating, like, our goal wasn't to change that for that changed perspective. The goal was to have a conversation and say, hey, how do we become better shooters and more effective hunters and woundless animals? And you can do all those things in part by going to a smaller caliber. Like, you still have to practice, you still have to do everything else, but at the end of the day, I think if you listen to things, it makes an incredibly strong case. And obviously backing that up now with field experience, not just yours, Steve, but as you said, a lot of other guys that we know who are on the same path, and the results that we're seeing is just very, very convincing for sure. Yeah. So like, whether you take Form's word at it or not, we've had those conversations, and I think he makes a strong case. And then we are just continuing to see it with our eyes and with people we know and trust who are on that path as well.
Yeah. I've had plenty of conversations too with guys like, yeah, no, I'm still shooting my big gun. It's like they don't, I think it's just an ego thing. I don't know. Like
Mm.
they can't look at the actual data and go, oh yeah, you're right. I should be doing this. If you're one of those guys, just like take a step back, look at all the information and go, what's the end goal? Kill the animal when I squeeze that trigger. What's the best way to do that? Look at all the data we just provided on a consistent basis.
Well, rifle related, and I still am shooting my 7 Psalm, so I haven't made a change yet. And
Yeah.
it's not because of um I don't have any resistance to anything. It's just practicality, right? Like time and
Yeah.
money and everything else. I just haven't made a change. But
Yeah. You will by next year.
but related to that, I did have ELDX bullets kind of on my gear of the year. And I think I actually had these last year, but it was fresh again in part because I had done so much experimenting over the years with so many different bullets on my own, right? I mean, I've in the last 5 years, I've killed things with Nosler partitions, Nosler Accubons, ballistic tips, ELDX, hammers, Barnes, so many things. And even before all these conversations with Form and everything else, I just got to the point where I'd experimented so much and was kind of tired of tinkering and just was like, okay, I just want to pick something and hunt. So going into 2023, it started with a spring bear hunt, and I basically just said, hey, I have a bunch of ELDX bullets. They're pretty readily available. They're very affordable. So going into 2023, until I have a reason not to, I'm just going to shoot ELDX bullets. Um, and then killed my spring bear. It worked fantastic. Kept shooting it all summer, just crazy consistent. Again, because they're more available and more affordable, I was able to shoot more often with them. Um, had the Dall sheep hunt, performed fantastic. Uh, had that elk, performed absolutely fantastic. And so I mean, I had shot ELDX bullets 10 years ago as well, but it was just kind of like I was circling back to them and saying, hey, until they give me a reason to not use them, I'm going to use them. Um, and that was all prior to these conversations with Form. And then obviously I had all the conversations with Form. And again, listen to those if you haven't. They're not meant to be a commercial for ELDX or Hornady or anything, but they were, one of the bullets where after talking with him is like, yeah, they're a solid choice for sure. So that only kind of reinforced everything for me. And then obviously just continued to use them this year and had zero complaints. So for me, they stood out again in part because like a lot of what we discussed validated my prior experience, and then in part just because it's like, hey, they're more readily available, they're more affordable, and they're getting the job done very consistently. So why, at this point, like, why would I change? So, um, yeah, simple and effective, and they made the list. All right, Steve, stick on shooting. Tell me about the tripod.
I guess it was just the moose hunt. Yeah. So just on the moose hunt, I knew the chance you're gonna be hunting very grassy, brushy country. The chance that you're gonna lay down prone was very small. To the point I'm like, I don't even know if it's worth packing a bipod. 'Cause, like, I just don't see that happening. You're gonna have to be shooting a moose over the top of brush. It's relatively flat-ish country. You're not like in big mountains. And then I was like, man, if you're gonna shoot elevated off of a like there's no better way to do that than off of a tripod. Going back to being super stupid or super lucky. Um, with SNS Archery, we st sell the really right stuff tripods. I hadn't really. You have one you brought on a bear hunt a couple years ago. I remember we were shooting off of playing around. I haven't, frankly, spent a ton of time with them, but I just went to Rob. Hey, Rob, what's a good one to take? He handed one. It's like, it's kind of heavy. Oh, well, I'll take it. And I mean, it was just incredible. All the sitting around we did. I dry fired on the moose hunt where we're just, calling and waiting and glassing. And I dry fired 1,000+ times with that tripod in different scenarios, always on like a freaking seagull or something down in the river at 600 yards or 800 yards or 1,000 yards. And I was absolutely blown away by just how stable that thing was. Um, to the, yeah, it just really was. I don't want to use game changing, but it's pretty freaking awesome. Um, and they are really expensive, man. You're talking $1,600 for a tripod. So you put it on the list and it's like, I know this is for the vast majority of guys, this is not even an option. Um, but maybe I need to explore more. Maybe there's other options that are close to the performance of it. But it's not, I mean, like I love my Asiac tripod for glassing and it's lightweight and backpacking, but you compare the backcountry light one that I take versus that really light stuff to shoot off of, it's night and day difference, right? If you want to, like I was sitting on my butt, holding on seagulls at 800 yards and not going off the center mass of the body of that seagull. Like just unbelievably stable. Um, and it really would just change. Like if you're hunting with kids, I mean, just anybody, man, just having the gun. I mean, it goes back to the whole shooting a smaller caliber thing, right? You're making more accurate, more precise shots and being able to have that gun rock solid and comfortable. And I think another part of it is it did not work well on Dan Sulzman's gun because he had like a 300 short mag, a super heavy gun, heavy scope on it, and he only had an Arca rail up in the front. Uh,
Yep.
and where my rail goes all the way back to the magazine, so my gun being lightweight, and then it just basically balanced perfectly on top of that thing to where it um, you know, wasn't trying to lean one way or fall back or whatever. It's just balanced on there. And you can almost free recoil that thing where you just get on it and, you just barely touch the gun and put it into your shoulder and squeeze off the trigger. And oof, man, incredible. So it had me rethinking, like, I think I could pack a really right stuff tripod, completely ditch a rear bag and bipod and it's still going to be added weight to the pack for sure, but not as bad because I feel, my limit is 600 yards, and I feel really confident I could just be in about any position and make that shot. The only thing in my mind is like there's definitely times you're like belly crawling over a rise and you can kind of you can splay the legs out on the tripod and get it low to the ground, but I haven't that's going to be kind of awkward. It's already awkward when you're trying to like belly crawl and push the gun in front of you. And now you got this tripod that's all laid out, it'd be a little tricky. So I need to play with
Hmm.
that and see if that's actually an issue or not. But yeah, it was Justin shot his moose off of the tripod. I shot my moose off the tripod. It was, and again, the countless times we set it up, just dry firing or as a moose was coming in, getting ready. It's pretty freaking phenomenal.
Yeah.
To the point where, yeah, one of my buddy Keith took his boy out hunting, and I was like, dude, come, like I brought a tripod to him, like take this, like your son's gonna have a much higher chance of shooting um, a good shot with this. Well, speaking of which, I need to get that back from him.
Yeah.
I forgot about it, so I just said it. But
Uh, it's partial. Obviously, anytime we're talking about tripod, it's a combination. It's a system. You got the tripod body, the legs, and then you have the head. So for you, you had
yeah,
RS legs, and then you're using the anvil head, correct?
yeah, yeah. And um, that head is garbage if you want to glass off. You can't even glass with binoculars off that thing. It's freaking terrible. There is no, there is no finding that right friction point where you can glass from. It's like I tried many times. It's on the Musan. It's absolutely garbage to the point I just stopped. I just screw it. It's not even worth trying to put on there. So definitely need a solution for like a lightweight Nighthawk head that you then just clip into that Arca clamp on that anvil head. So then you then have your traditional pan head. But
Mhm.
I don't have the solution yet because that gets clunky and extra. I just hate packing extra crap into the backcountry. Yeah, working fleshing that out. But just the shooting off of that tripod, freaking awesome.
Yeah, I think right now it's an excellent tool for scenarios, but it's not obviously a do-it-all, right? So
No, no,
the
no.
moose hunt, even Kodiak, the hunts we've done there, just knowing the shooting positions, and obviously the fact that you're not backpacking, so weight's a little bit less relevant. I could see it even being some like a great option for antelope hunting, more open country, sitting, standing, kneeling shots there. It's definitely going to be an excellent choice for certain applications, and then a less than ideal choice for others, for sure. Which is in all reality, is the case with tripods in general. I mean, something I've struggled with when people ask, like, hey, what's your recommendation for a tripod or a head? And it is so situational dependent. And yes, you can use one thing for everything. But at this point in time, if you're using one thing for everything, you, without a doubt, are making compromises for certain things.
Yeah.
For me, super simple, cheap, accessible one was those Showa gloves, Steve. Used them
Hmm.
on the caribou hunt. I used them on the mountain goat hunt. Recommendation, I think, first came to us from Ben Reynolds. But these are just a fully waterproof, lightly lined glove with a really good cuff. So for the caribou hunt, they were phenomenal for the paddling portion, going back to pack rafting, being wet and chilly on the water there. And then on the mountain goat hunt, they stood out again just because we faced rain and snow and cold temperatures. And they're just excellent. Just a perfect example of an item that's out there that is very affordable. It's not a quote unquote hunting glove, but it blows away in terms of performance options from hunting brands that cost quite literally 5 times as much. Just absolutely crushed them in performance. So, having struggled in the past with like finding the right balance between a glove that is somewhat warm but not too warm or too bulky, and then something that is or isn't waterproof, they were just a fantastic option that I know I'll get continued use out of on future hunts or just, other winter activities as well.
Yeah, those things kick butt. Um, Sig Zulu binoculars. It's on Gear of the Year. I think I've had it on like honorable mention Gear of the Year in the past. They're still a work in progress. Still not perfect. Like going back to like tripods, like it's not perfect. It's not for every situation. But like on the caribou hunt, I was like, "Ah, I don't need to pack them. I'm just gonna take my Swaros." And Jeff Bloomquist was like, "Hey, can you bring a pair for me?" Yeah, sure, no problem. Then on the hunt, I like every time I wanted to see something, hey, give me those. Like it was nonstop. Like I borrowed them more, like I mean, just constantly. Um, yeah, they're just. I've said this 1,000 times at this point. I can't wait until that gets better. The glass gets better, the field of view gets better. They can integrate a rangefinder into that thing. Holy crap. So it's the future's there. It's promising. They are like I wouldn't, buy a pair on sale around Black Friday or something because they're freaking awesome. Um, they're just yeah. And then so on Jeff had I think I packed my 12s. You definitely want to go with the lower magnification, in my opinion. They have a 12, a 16, and a 20. The 20s are garbage. The 16s are okay, but because the glass isn't like stellar compared to, Swaro, things like that, that the 12s, you get a wider field of view. So you're seeing more country at once. You're not quite as tunnel vision. And then any like we've talked about in spine scope reviews, the less magnification, the least amount of flaws you're going to see in the glass. It's going to be a brighter image. It's going to appear to be sharper. So the 12 by 42s are a really good one. But then we took on the moose hunt, they came out with their pros or whatever. They're a larger objective lens. I want to say 50 or something like that. And we took their 18s. And for the moose hunt, same deal. I mean, anytime a moose was coming in, it's like, I need a better look at that thing. I packed them as a spine scope, basically. I didn't take a spine scope on that trip and just packed those. So I had my swirls on my chest, and those were just they're significantly bigger, bulkier, heavier than the 42 millimeter objective ones. So they kind of more fall into that like big, 18 by 56 type glass that you're used to with from SLCs or Vortex, and the SIG has their 18 by 56s that I like, or 15 by 56. Um, but they're just freaking awesome to have. I mean, yeah. So definitely, if you're interested in them, I can't recommend enough. So just stay away from if you're going with the 42 millimeter objective, which if for a binocular like to wear on your chest, I would definitely recommend. I would go with the 12s.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think they're very, very adequate right now. But there's
Hmm.
so much potential and promise that it's hard not to talk about what if or when they or that they
Yeah.
could, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I think I don't know if we've downplayed them too much or like said too much about their compromises and quality. Again, we're coming from comparing them to something like Swaros, another Alpha Glass, but uh, I'm not trying to play them up, but also I also don't want people to think we're downplaying them so hard that they're not extremely adequate and usable right now. Um, they are good class for sure.
Yeah.
Like good just meaning like yeah, just very functional and adequate in many circumstances. They're just gonna struggle in, poor lighting conditions and things like that. So
Yeah. When you're
yeah.
sitting down on top of a peak and you want to glass a lot of country and you have the ability to put your binoculars on a tripod, 1,000 times out of 1,000, I want, a good 8 by 42 binocular or 10 by 42,
Hmm.
an L Pure mounted on that tripod. All the other times I'm hiking, moving, I want the freaking SIGs. And it's just frustrating you got to pick your poison there, just going into that hunt. So yeah,
Yeah, that's a good way to
it'll
put
get
it.
there.
I put the Phoenix headlamp on the
Yeah.
list, the Phoenix HMR 50. I've been using it for at least 2 years now. We've talked as part of the experience project about doing some other testings and comparisons and more like formalized, standardized testing, which we'll probably still do. Um, but as I was just thinking about at the end of the day, what I want from a headlamp, it's getting the job done. And, I'm still interested in like testing and comparison for the sake, but I also don't have the quote unquote itch or the complaints on the Phoenix that really is making me look for something better at this point. Because every time I've picked up something else, looked at something else, used something else, I just keep going back to the Phoenix. So I love it.
Yeah.
It's a good balance of weight and size and power. Multiple modes, has a white and red, which I personally really like. A very great system for batteries, swapping batteries, charging batteries. We've talked before, like the battery cell itself, you can plug directly into a battery bank. Um, I just carry the headlamp with a battery in it, carry a spare battery, so you can always swap batteries if something dies, and then you're charging the battery that's not in the lamp. The headlamp's fully usable while you're charging your secondary battery. That said, there hasn't been a hunt yet where I've actually dug into my second battery. So it does have good life. I'm almost carrying that second battery as insurance at this point. So yeah, I just really, really like that headlamp.
I packed so I got all a bunch of headlamps rounded up for the Experience Project and had intended to do a thorough review before season. Just the summer got crazy, didn't get to it. There's a whole pile of things that didn't get done this summer with yeah, things kind of went crazy with having to move and then obviously we talked about on Monday where I we purchased the sew shop and that was a lot of legwork that kind of didn't wasn't on my plan when the year started. But anyways, the took a night core one on the caribou hunt. It was okay. I had higher. It was the out of all the ones, it was my first choice. It was kind of the lightest and spec wise the brightest for its weight, I guess you could. And I ended up like, it was okay. Like I had a couple issues with it actually, and then I took the Phoenix on the moose hunt, and it's freaking fantastic. Like you said, it's everything you really want in a headlamp. It's uh, significantly. It'll be curious to do the review because we got a Peaks headlamp that on paper is brighter, like their lumens, but it's like in person, they're not even freaking close. The Phoenix crushes it, and it's not even supposed to be near as bright. So the downside when you dive into specs is the runtime, like on high, medium, and low. Like you said, you've made it through hunts. I had to on the moose hunt. There's a lot of dark. We're cutting up a lot of animals in the dark. There's a lot of use of the headlamp, and I did have to swap out my battery. But you can buy the ones with USB-C built in, like a charger built into the battery. So all you gotta do is plug a cable into that battery. And I did find Nitecore makes a higher milliamp one that's I think 950 versus the 7 or 800 that the stock one is. So you get an extra, 25, 30% battery capacity there, which is I haven't tested to see. That'll be part of the headlamp reviews. What does that actually translate into? But yeah, it was freaking awesome. If anything, I wish it had a low setting because like low, medium, and high, but low is still pretty dang bright to where
Hmm.
when you're just doing camp stuff, it's kind of almost too much.
Yeah, and that's where I use the red personally.
Yeah, but it's like yeah, you're like in your I don't know. Yeah, I don't like the red. I guess maybe it's how I see colors. It's like I
Oh,
have no depth perception. It's just weird. Yeah.
yeah, she's got them old eyes.
Yeah.
It's the
Whatever. I
extra
got you by
4 months
2 months.
on me. Hey, no, it's not two.
Oh, 4. All
See,
right.
you're always trying to
You're
freaking
August.
pull crap
Yeah.
over. Yeah, next for you, Steve.
Gosh, a really expensive one here. Steak seasoning. Um, like I have uh, yeah, I don't, it's just not something a lot of friends do. Always just pack a little bit of steak seasoning. It's not something I've ever, like I maybe have done it a couple times, but it's not a consistent item it's not even on my gear list. It's on my gear list now, man. After the caribou hunt, I think Jeff packed, I think it was just McCormick regular
Yeah, it was
steak
like a
seasoning.
Montreal or Quebec steak seasoning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Montreal. That's what it was. McCormick Montreal steak. Yeah. I'm Googling that, make sure. Anyways, we lived off of eating meat there for 36 hours because we were running low on food and we didn't want to hike the 3.5 miles of river to get back to waiting for the river to go down and uh yeah, McCormick Montreal. Um, but it was just because the meat by itself is good. You add the steak, like douse it in steak seasoning and cook it over a fire. It's incredible. And then I packed a bunch of steak seasoning on the moose hunt. Same deal. We ended up, we weren't running low on food, but we had an extra 36, 48 hours there waiting to get picked up by the airplane. And we're eating moose back straps and yeah, just freaking awesome. So definitely something that I'm going to make a much better habit of packing in the future. And it was just a fun. We all enjoyed it so much that we're I don't say made a pledge, but everyone's like, man, we're gonna do this at home with the kids. And I know
Yeah.
Jeff's done it with his kids. I was in Big Sky, Montana a few weekends ago with my kids, and then um, my couple nephew, nieces, and so my wife's sister and husband, and um, and so I had all the kids with like basically marshmallow roasting sticks, but we were cooking steaks over this fire pit in the backyard, and it was freaking cool. It was super cool for them to kind of see. It's like a more intimate thing with your eating your meat. Like you got the raw meat, you're sticking it on there, you're cooking over a fire versus just, your parents slapping it on a plate for you. It was a cool experience. They all at first it was like, what are we doing? And then like once we got into it, it was like they were as excited about that as they would have been if we were making s'mores. It just kept like, oh, another one, cooking it and cooking it. It was cool.
If I could go back and have any single meal or food related experience of the entire year, it would certainly be next to a river cooking, like cutting up caribou meat on a packraft paddle and then cooking it over a fire. Like it was
Yeah,
so
it
good.
was so good.
Yeah. The next one, it's on the list. It's also annoying. It's something we can't show you or necessarily give you a link to, but the mid-layer prototype that we had been working on with Outdoor Vitals, again, even before this year, really, but uh, that piece on the hunts, yes, but on a bunch of other stuff outside of the hunts, just consistently using that piece, I'm just extremely excited about. I'm not saying that to like build suspense or excitement. I have no idea when this thing's coming, what it's going to cost. I have zero details other than the fact that you and I, Steve, have been working on this piece with a few others and have, you know, it's been cool to be able to like make changes and tweaks and try different options and fabric weights and whatever. Um, and I absolutely love that piece right now. So hopefully it is something we can share more about. I think it's probably going to be released in 2025, I think. But yeah, I would just be dishonest to say it wasn't a gear of the year piece for me.
Yeah, it's I have, I don't know, 4 or 5 prototypes through the last 18 months or how long we've been working on it, and just wearing kind of all of them off and on, working out. It's getting colder, so riding my mountain bike, I've just been wearing it by itself. It's what's the fabric called?
The Polar Tech Alpha is kind of on top, and then the Grid Fleece and other areas.
Yeah, it's just such a great like for high out, like you can wear it just sitting, glassing, or like full on high output activities, which is, I think, where it shines. And it's just been like as a next to skin layer, it's been freaking fantastic. And it's not even, I think it's meant to be as a mid layer, but yeah, it's been awesome. So, and then yeah, we're working on the pants and the puffy jacket with them. Still some tweaks and stuff to do there. The materials weren't up to spec for this year. But yeah, the future's gonna be cool with that. Uh, Another expensive one, Voltaren gel. This came from my brother-in-law.
We have to
Uh,
throw out Game Changer here, Steve. It's
Game changer.
undeniable.
Game changer. If Mark and I are both 40, and some hunts your knee just effing kills you and it's aching the whole time, or your lower back or whatever, that stuff is on the caribou hunt. Like my left knee had been bugging me for the whole year, and Justin was having some knee issues, and we almost went through an entire bottle of that stuff. But it's like you're hiking, and there's one thing to be like, oh, it's kind of achy, whatever. But when it's like pretty painful, it's getting up there on the pain scale. You put that stuff on there, and within 5 minutes, the pain's gone, and it stays away for 4 to 6 hours. It's freaking awesome. Obviously, it's not something, it's a drug. You don't want to abuse it. But as you're getting older and you get painful joints and whatnot, it's definitely on my list now. It's going to be in my little first aid kit bag with me on every hunt. And on the moose hunt, I didn't take it. I didn't use it once, right? I didn't need it. Like it wasn't that. It was a kind of different demand than as far as hiking goes versus the caribou hunt. My knee wasn't bugging me at all. Lower back wasn't bugging me. I didn't use it, but I was certainly glad I had it in there in case I needed it.
Yeah, I try and use it as little as possible, but when you actually need it, it provides relief 100%. It's impressive stuff. And it's funny how, like, in our circles a little bit, it's become like this little, like, pass it around type thing. Like,
Yeah.
instead of someone, like, passing around a pipe, it's this little, people are passing around Voltaren, things like the Death Hike, or I think even on the mountain goat hunt. I think Mark packed it, but then Justin was like, "Hey man, let me have a hit of that stuff, you know?" Oh, so funny. But yeah,
Yeah.
super effective for sure. Especially because you're just applying it acutely to the area that's bothering you versus randomly popping ibuprofen or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's impressive.
Yeah. Kind of honorable mention, the Bear Watch Bear Fence. We absolutely should have had it on the caribou hunt. Like Bloomquist says I was going to bring one. I think he's lying. But it was on the moose hunt. Obviously, with all the bears we had no issues whenever meat was in the bear fence. I was just really impressed with that thing. I don't have any comparison to other bear fences that are on the market. I know there's DIY versions you can do, but this thing was super lightweight. The shock was pretty legit. Like when the batteries were fresh, man, that thing zaps you. And just yeah, excited. I'm glad I own that now and take it on future hunts. The only thing I'll do in the future, so I think they have a couple versions. I bought their ultralight version. The only thing I'll do in the future is you can buy a little cable to run it off of a battery bank and then have a solar panel that goes with that. So you basically have the battery bank plugged right into the unit and then a solar panel plugged into the battery bank. And I think you could pretty well, like depending on the size of the solar panel, the amount of sun you're getting, I think that would just run indefinitely going that version. So that's a change I'll make for the future, but definitely we're planning to go back to Alaska right now again and next year, and yeah, I'm glad I own it and take that thing. So if you're looking for a bear fence, again, I got no experience with others, but it's one of those things you can't imagine something being significantly better than what this was. It worked. It's lightweight. It's easy to set up.
I don't think we talked in any detail about it. Your use on it with the moose hunt, what type of battery were you using and what type of life did you get out of
So
it?
it would run for 48 hours ish on 8 AA batteries.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
And if you did the math, I can't remember. I think those batteries were 1500 milliamps each.
A double A
Yeah.
is?
Yeah, it was
Oh
way more
wow.
than you
That's
think.
surprising.
Yeah. Way more than you think. So so 12,000 milliamps combined with all 8 AA's.
For 48
And
hours.
so I was like, I was thinking, all right, you get a 20,000 milliamp battery bank and a solar panel. You're
Mm-hmm.
probably, you're gonna last, I don't know, three and a half days off of that with no sun. And I guarantee, like just one day of good sun, that thing would recharge fully. So
Mm-hmm.
depending on the size of your solar panel, which it wouldn't have to be a very big one, like yeah, 11 by 20 inches or something like that, something super light and compact. Yeah,
Hmm. That'd be fun to play with, like just experimenting with that.
yeah. Then other honorable mention, Justin Nelson. He's been running this. Oh man, what the heck's the name of the chair? We'll have to put it in the
Crazy
link.
Creek?
Crazy Creek chair for a couple years now and bragging about it. And it's like, dude, you're crazy. Stop being so lazy. Just sit your butt on the ground, you know? And on the moose hunt,
But 40-year-old Steve
well,
said.
yeah, yeah. Well, I get no. So he packed it on the caribou hunt, and obviously I sat in it a couple times. I think everybody did, and it's like, yeah, it's pretty nice, you know. In that type of hunt where there's the potential to be in camp for multiple days or waiting out a lot of weather. yeah, it's got its place. So I ended up taking that chair to our sew shop, and I was like, man, this thing's heavy. Like I can make a much lighter version. So I did. I had him knock out a prototype real quick that was like half the weight, and I ran that on the moose hunt, and it was freaking awesome, man. Like I started taking it because just so much of the hunt was, all right, we're gonna go hike 2 miles and sit all day. It's freaking cozy and helps the lower back for sure. So definitely not something I'm gonna take on a like a hardcore backpacking hunt, but those kind of in between ones where like, oh yeah, maybe I'm already kind of light, I can spare the extra weight, or the Alaska type hunts where you know you're gonna be sitting a lot, or the potential to be waiting multiple days for a plane to come pick you up. It was kind of nice to have around.
Hmm.
So eat my words there and be like, okay, yeah, this chair is kind of cool.
The final one I had kind of under honorable mentions was just my Hillberg, the Nyack. And I mean, if people heard the stories, I've also had it fail before, which is on my sheep hunt in 2023. But I've continued to use that hunt, and I really do think that that failure I had was pretty unique to just incredibly extreme conditions. I had used it since after that, and then used it for, every experience in Alaska this year. And just looking back and realizing I've lived in that thing for over a month at this point, and just it's great. I it's a
We know
lighter
two
for
guys can sleep in it.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's lighter for a Hilleberg, but still incredibly strong. And then yeah, I was gonna bring that up on the caribou hunt. When we got flooded out by the river unexpectedly at 3 in the morning. Or no, it wasn't then. It was we used your Hilleberg.
We
Yeah,
used my Hilleberg as a rain shell to put over the top of the meat because we had to, we left some meat up on top of the mountain as we were shuttling it all down,
yeah.
and so we didn't have a shelter. And yeah, we went um, basically had like instead of shoulder to shoulder, we flipped around so you were sleeping, and then I went where my head was by your feet, and you were
Hmm.
like, I don't know how this is gonna work. And frankly, I mean, not like there's a lot of room to do anything in there, but once you laid down, it was fine.
Yeah, I had only used it solo. And it's for sure a Paulus solo, meaning I mean, you can spread out inside, you can easily change. It's very livable if you're on a hunt where it's an extended hunt. You think you may be spending a lot of time in the shelter. It's extremely comfortable solo to cook, to spread out, to dry stuff out, whatever. They essentially call it a man and a half tent. So it's not necessarily meant to be a two-man tent. They'll talk about how you can share it. But I had never shared it until that night, Steve. And I wouldn't want to live in it with you for days at a time if we were riding out in a storm in Alaska. But in terms of sleeping, it was freaking fine. It was totally
Yeah.
doable.
Yeah.
So I mean that model is just one, obviously, of many. If you look at like the caribou hunt, I know you for you guys in the moose hunt, and then even again on the goat hunt, not meant to be a Hilleberg commercial, but on all those hunts, everyone had a Hilleberg, a bunch of different models. And they're just a great choice if you need a shelter that's really going to stand up to some severe conditions. And really at this point, I mean, I love the versatility too, as you've talked many times, Steve. You can set up just the outer and use a bivy inside of it. You could totally do that with mine and make it more livable for two guys. And it's just a situation where tents are unique. And again, going back to our spoiled situation, I have a whole collection of tents and different tents, and you can customize and have, what's perfect for any given trip. But if you told me I had to just have like a tarp and a bivy and then a Hillberg and do absolutely anything and everything anywhere at any time, like I'd take it. I'd be happy. Um, so yeah, it just again, it stood out to me this year after continuing to use it and realizing how many nights I had in it. Let's see. Are you done?
I'm done. Yeah.
You're done. Sweet. Well, that's right, man. Gear of the year. Again, everything we mentioned today, we'll have a link for each of those items. So be sure to check that out. We'll include some photos and stuff like that, maybe in certain places from some of the trips or from some of the gear and using it. And then just a lot of things coming soon. So I know I mentioned some of these in the introduction, But if you're catching this episode as it is released, we will be on Monday kicking off our once a year sale. So on Monday, November 25th, the once a year sale for Exo Mountain Gear. To make sure you don't miss that, the best thing you can do is just sign up, make sure you receive our emails. So you can go to exomountaingear.com/newsletter for that. That's kicking off. And then also here very soon, we've obviously said a lot about some of our experiences in Alaska and the Experience Project. And those videos are also releasing very soon. So again, if you sign up for our emails, we'll be sure to let you know when those are coming. Or if you just want to go straight to our YouTube channel and hit subscribe, I'll have a link to that in the show description as well. But yeah, those are two things that are coming very quick here to stay tuned for and to check out, and even more after that into the holidays and already into 2025, which is crazy around the corner. So a lot going on. Thank you guys for tuning in and following along. As always, if you have any questions for us, just send an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com and we'll talk to you soon.